Hello, everybody. Welcome into another edition of Go with the Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. My name is Brandon Adams. Happy to have you with us as we take a look at the upcoming week's worth of games in the SEC after quite a debut for both the Georgia Bulldogs, for the good and the bad, a week ago, and the rest of the Southeastern Conference there as well. The nation's been going now for a few weeks, but the SEC is really getting into the heat of its schedule. And, of course, Georgia, Auburn, a huge part of that. Dari, this is one of those games that when you look back and you see the schedule in the offseason. You knew Georgia Auburn was going to be a big game no matter when it's played. The fact that it's week 2 may make it even bigger game between the Dogs and the Tigers here.
Huge game, monster game for both teams. Georgia came off a little rocky start. Auburn's coming off a really good win against a solid Kentucky team. So huge game right out the gates. I think it's only two top 10 ranked teams going on this weekend, so it's going to be a lot of fun.
And, of course, I'm happy to have Dari Payro from R.S. Andrews with us. Of course, R.S. Andrews known for air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. They take great care of the Dog Nation audience and have for a long time. Dari's also really good at picking games, which we will show you here in a moment. He is the leader in our standings for right now. We'll get to that. Let me kind of explain, though, how Go with the Flow presented by R.S. Andrews works, and then we'll start rolling through all of this. Over the course of our show, we'll hear from Dog Nation's Mike Griffith, Jeff Sintel, Connor Riley. The Dog Nation Daily audience will have a chance to weigh in. I'll make my pick, and that'll establish a consensus. And then Dari Payro, here representing R.S. Andrews, and hopefully you, as you play along from home, will decide if you want to go with the flow and join the consensus for the upcoming games. We keep track of how these games have gone, and for week 1, as I mentioned before, Dari is on top of the standings right now, 5-3 a week ago. He is joined at the top by a couple of our Dog Nation riders right now, both Mike Griffith and Jeff Sintel, also going 5-3 as well. The Dog Nation Daily audience split it last week, 4-4, so a 500 record for the audience. And then myself, along with Connor Riley, we brought up the rear a week ago, 3-5. Although, Dari, I must say, I felt like I was hosed a little bit about the Georgia-Arkansas point spread. Now, listen, I was glad to see Georgia get a comfortable victory, but after taking Arkansas plus the points last week during our show, to see that essentially be the right side of the entirety of the game, only to have Georgia cover before it was done, as a fan, I was glad to see it. As a bettor, I was a little disappointed to see my wallet a little lighter.
Yeah, that was a crazy game. I was kind of shocked. After halftime, I didn't think covering that game, was even a possibility. The way they played in that first half, but how that game ended was really crazy around the point spread. Georgia kicked a field goal. There's a minute and a half left in the game to get the cover in. Depending on where you got your bet in. But if you were 26.5 or less, it was covering that. There's a defensive penalty on Arkansas, which could have given Georgia a first down. They almost put the offense back on there, and then they elected to take the points and kick the ball off to Arkansas, where they probably could have ran out the clock. So really interesting on declining the penalty and taking those points to actually cover. I'll take that win and cover all day long, especially on one of my love picks. That was one of my prime picks for the week, and it came through. Anyway, it happens. I'm good with that.
And we should point out our recording schedule means that we record the show before the day that it airs, and that means there will be some line movement by the time we get to the end of the week. By the time we get to game time, we're all making these picks to stay consistent based on kind of an early week line. Frankly, though, if you plan on betting any of these games, and Dari, I know you can give people advice on this, they need to be line shopping anyway for the best number, especially on these spreads that kind of teeter around the 3, around the 7, the half point. We're going to see a half point make an appearance here on a couple of these lines here this week. The half point, depending on which side it's on, makes all the difference in the world. So we saw a good bit of line movement with SEC games heading towards last Saturday as it was. And line shopping is always the right decision for people who truly want to do more than just watch these games on television. If you want to get down action, you better be doing some window shopping for the best number.
Definitely, absolutely. Got to get your numbers in. Got to keep an eye on that and see where you can get. Picking up a half point or a point is crucial.
So speaking of numbers, Georgia's number for Saturday is a 7-point favorite against the Auburn Tigers. This is the Deep South's oldest rivalry. A little bit of a page turned in this rivalry a couple of years ago when Georgia and Auburn played twice in the same season in 2017, and a rematch in the SEC championship, and an even more unique, if you will, page to be turned here this year as this rivalry moves already planned to October. But now, because of the changes of the coronavirus, Georgia and Auburn now slated for week 2. So it's a brand new frontier for Georgia and Auburn, but the intensity will be certainly the same. One of the biggest games that either team will play for this upcoming season. And for thoughts on whether or not Georgia can cover the 7 points, let's turn to our buddy Mike Griffith from Dog Nation. Mike, start us off with the picks for today.
Yeah, it seems to me that Auburn didn't even score to the fourth quarter last year. And they got 4 new offensive linemen starting. And listen, I'm a big Bo Nix fan. What a prodigy, what a legend in the making and all that good stuff. But the reality is going to strike for Auburn. This ain't Kentucky defense they're playing. I think there's been a lot of late nights in the Georgia coaches' offices. I'm going to take Georgia to win this game convincingly, 30-10 over Auburn.
So Mike Griffith on the side of Georgia, minus the 7 points against Auburn. What about Dog Nation's Jeff Sintel? Jeff, do you agree with that take?
I see an Auburn team that wherever they have a strength, Georgia has a strength in greater numbers to counter that. I really think Auburn's a different team without the way they were so good up front on the defensive line and also the offensive side of the ball. I think this to me seems like 14 to 20 point win time for Georgia. I definitely think I'm going to take those 7 points. I think I like Georgia to cover in a big way inside Stanford Stadium.
So Jeff also on the side of UGA on that. What about Dog Nation's Connor Riley? Connor, your thoughts on the Dogs and the Tigers?
I saw this offense play last week, and hopefully here I'm going to zig against Jeff and Griff, and if I'm wrong, that means Georgia wins comfortably, but I think this is going to be a really close game. I think it's going to be a rock fight. I think it's going to be ugly. And because of that, I think it just stays close throughout. And I'm going to take Auburn here plus the 7.
So Connor takes Auburn. Dog Nation Daily listeners and viewers disagree. The audience, by the tune of 77%, take Georgia here over Auburn. That's not much of a surprise. Typically, the Dog Nation Daily audience usually has a pretty strong feeling with the home team. And this one, Dari, I'm going to be honest with you. I went against Georgia against the spread last week. For the most part in the game, that was the right side to be on, although UGA eventually held on to get the cover. I was really, really tempted to go Auburn here again. Not that I think Auburn wins the game, but maybe keeping it closer than the 7, which is a little bit of substantial number. However, Georgia found a way to win by 7 on the road a year ago against Auburn. And Kirby Smart has now been at UGA long enough that there's a little bit of a track record to go off of when it comes to Gus Malzahn. You take a look at the numbers here. This will be the 6th time that Kirby Smart has met Malzahn as Georgia coach, given the fact they played twice back in 2017. Kirby's 4-1 against the spread in those games against Georgia. The only time that Georgia failed to cover the spread against Auburn, the only time that Georgia has failed to win straight up even was in the November 2017 matchup. Hostile crowd there for Auburn that day at Jordan-Hare Stadium. This is not that kind of environment. It is a UGA home game, if not a bit subdued because of the coronavirus crowd. So the fact that Georgia has had so much success against Auburn has kind of convinced me to take Georgia. I don't think Georgia scores a lot in this game. I don't think the offense is there and capable of doing that. But I do believe in the Georgia defense. Auburn did not run the ball well a week ago against Kentucky, even though the Tigers did cover the spread there. So I don't have a strong feeling about Georgia here, but the track record alone for Kirby against Malzahn is enough for me to take the Dogs, and that puts the flow on the side of UGA. Dar, do you want to go with the flow and take Georgia?
I can't do it. I'm going to have to take Auburn in the points. There's too many question marks for Georgia from last week. You have the quarterback position. It's kind of up there. The running game, which is really concerning with that offensive line. I did like Stetson look, really decisive when he came in as a quarterback. He did a great job providing a spark, getting him on track, got the ball out of his hands quick. But Auburn's a much better team than Arkansas. And I mean, Georgia couldn't get the running game going. I mean, they have 42 carries for 121 yards. It's less than 3 yards per carry. Yuck, barf. I mean, that's not Georgia football. Auburn and Bo Nix look really good against Kentucky. Kentucky has a really solid team, a really good defense. And Auburn handle business against them, so you got to give them some props. Georgia's, in order for Georgia to win this game, they're going to need to shut down Seth Williams. They can't let him have a big game. That guy's going to be playing on Sundays here soon. and they just got to limit any kind of big plays. Really interesting to see, how Kirby plays this game, if he's going to play more zone or roll coverage, in zone to Seth Williams, or play more man-to-man defense. But whatever they do, they also need to make sure Bo Nix doesn't make any big plays with his legs. They need to contain him in the pocket. Like I said last week, he's not an accurate passer, so we need to, make him beat Georgia with his arm. Georgia's going to have to protect the ball and limit those penalties that they had against Arkansas. I think both defenses are going to play well in this game. I love Georgia's defense. I love LeCount. He's the heart and soul of that defense. It's going to be a close game. I like Georgia to win close in a very, very close game. There's going to be a lot of sweat down the stretch on this game.
No doubt a stiff challenge awaiting Georgia against Auburn on Saturday. We're off and running here on Go with the Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. Let's turn our attention now to the next game in the SEC. Florida, fresh off a big offensive performance, if not a shaky defensive performance, winning and covering at Ole Miss last week, returns home to take on South Carolina, which had its chances against Tennessee, but ultimately fell in that game late, also missing out on a chance to cover the spread there. Florida plays as a 18.5-point favorite against the South Carolina Gamecocks, and a homecoming of sorts for Will Muschamp back in Gainesville, where he was the coach at Florida just a few years ago. Mike Griffith, on the subject of Florida and South Carolina, are you on the Gators or are you on the Gamecocks? Take it away.
Yeah, Kyle Trask had a great start. His pass rating is almost as good as Stetson Bennett's. I think that Florida is going to beat South Carolina 45-24 and cover the spread in the Swamp.
So, Mike there on the side of the Florida Gators against South Carolina. Jeff Sintel, how about you? Florida, South Carolina. Which side are you on?
I think it's a little bit of a false positive with both of these schools from last week. I think Tennessee was a great test for Tennessee was a great test for South Carolina last week. I think that's going to help them this week against Florida. I still like that line. I'm going to lay the 18, but I don't think Florida's going to go gangbusters on the Gamecocks.
So Jeff also takes the Gators there. So both of our scribes on the side of the favorite. What about you, Connor Riley? Gators, Gamecocks.
I think 18.5 is just a little too many points here. I think South Carolina certainly has a better secondary than Ole Miss does. And because, again, I still don't think Florida can run the ball that well. I think South Carolina is going to be able to keep this close to 18.5 points.
So Connor on the side of the South Carolina Gamecocks. Dog Nation daily audience agrees with him. As I've said before, the audience for the most part is never going to really pick Florida here. 71% do take South Carolina at the very least to cover the spread against Florida on Saturday. And I think that one of the things you got to kind of keep in mind here is that Florida has been pretty good against the spread as of late. They've covered 6 of their last 8. The only 2 times, I'm talking about in SEC play, the only 2 games that were not a cover were obviously the loss to Georgia last season and also a push against LSU going back a couple games before that. But against lesser competition, Florida, for the most part, has handled its business. It's one of the reasons why I like Florida a week ago against Ole Miss. Yet something to keep in mind here. The 18.5-point number against South Carolina for this upcoming Saturday is the second biggest spread in SEC play for a Dan Mullen team since he became Florida coach back in 2018. That seems like a little bit much for me. I didn't get the result I wanted last week between Tennessee and South Carolina. I'll admit that. But I think the Gamecocks prove that they can play with people. They're not going to be a pushover necessarily. In this case, I think 18.5 is probably just a little too much, especially for a Florida team right now that's still dealing with some major questions on defense. So obviously I don't think South Carolina wins this game, but 18.5, I'll take those points. And with that, I'll take the Gamecocks. And believe it or not, that actually puts the flow on the side of South Carolina by a 3-2 margin. So, Dari, do you want to go with the flow and take South Carolina?
I don't. I'm taking Florida to cover. I'm going to ride this Florida gambling train. I'm all aboard right now. Will the real Kyle Pitts please stand up? Please stand up. Holy stat line. That guy had 8 catches, 170 yards, and 4 TDs. I want to draft this guy on my fantasy football team right now. Already, a year, 2 years before. Florida's offense is going to continue to light up the scoreboard this week. I don't see South Carolina being able to slow them down. South Carolina struggled to run the ball. I think they had a little over 2 yards per carry against Tennessee. That's going to be a problem. They won't be able to slow down the clock and control it. I think this game gets out of hand quick. I think South Carolina ends up throwing the ball 50-plus times in this game, trying to catch up, and that's not any kind of game plan Muschamp wants to be doing. I love Florida here.
So Dari loves Florida. The South Carolina game plan called into question, but your game plan for taking care of your heating and air conditioning, plumbing, electric needs around your home, trust me, R.S. Andrews is the right choice for all of you on that. One of the things I always appreciate is it's one of the reasons why I can refer R.S. Andrews, recommend them on air here, and have confidence in doing that, because I know they're going to show up on time. They're going to do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. As an example, let's say your water heater goes out. That's a problem for you and your family. In many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace that for you the same day, but you need to find them online at rsandrews.com. And of course, R.S. Andrews brings Go With The Flow to us each week here on the Dog Nation video channels. And it's good to have Dari Payro from R.S. Andrews as a part of that broadcast. Next game to consider, speaking of Tennessee, which beat South Carolina a week ago, taking on Missouri here this week. The Vols 11.5-point favorite here in this game. Mike Griffith, give us your thoughts on Missouri, Tennessee.
Yeah, welcome back to Neyland Stadium. The Vols with the longest Power 5 win streak in the nation, 7 games. Notre Dame's won 8 straight. Tennessee wins it, but Missouri makes it closer than you'd think. 27-24 Vols.
Mike takes Missouri here to keep it closer against Tennessee. Jeff Sintel, how about you on the subject of the Vols and the Tigers? What do you think?
I like Tennessee laying that 11.5. So for me, how well Tennessee played last week, they got a good opponent in South Carolina. Missouri, I like the line. I like Tennessee big this week.
Jeff Riverside's Mike goes the other direction, takes Tennessee. Connor Riley, how about you?
I like Tennessee by 2 touchdowns as well. I think Missouri's a nice story with Eli Drinkwitz and what they're bringing in there, but they needed a last-second touchdown to cover last week, depending on where you got that number. I think Tennessee, riding high off that win over South Carolina, is going to play well this week against Missouri and win easily.
Connor takes Tennessee as well, and the Dog Nation daily audience will join him on that too. 54% on the Vols to cover the spread. Pretty big 11.5-point number for Tennessee there against Missouri. Dari, I think this is a really interesting game. Tennessee is a team that's been hot. If you want to go back to last season, you talked about this last week, continuing that momentum here into the 2020 season. They've now covered 5 straight games in SEC play and have covered 6 of their last 7. So from that standpoint, Tennessee's been on a little bit of a run here. However, there's one thing that jumps out at me. Last year, Tennessee won against Missouri 24-20 as just a 2.5-point favorite. And that game was in Columbia. This game is in Knoxville. But are we really sure there's that big of a changeover from Tennessee year to year on the basis of some close wins to make them a double-digit favorite in a game they were favored by just 2.5 a year ago? I think that Missouri last week knew it had very little chance against Alabama, and we saw a lot of players not play. I think you expect to see Missouri get some talent back here for week 2 against Tennessee. I don't think Missouri wins this game. I think Eli Drinkwitz, that's asking too much for him in just the second game as Tigers coach. But the disparity year over year in terms of point spread change, even with the game moving from Columbia to Knoxville, that jumps out at me at least enough to wonder if Tennessee's capable of winning this one easily. I'm actually going to take a flyer on Missouri here, and I'll take the Tigers. However, the flow is on the side of Tennessee. Dari, you want to go with the flow and take the Vols?
I do not. I love Missouri in the points here. This one, I actually love this game a lot. I love Missouri. I think it's too many points for Tennessee to cover. Missouri did well against Alabama, shutting down their run. They actually did a fairly good job defensively. They got lit up through the air. Tennessee kind of struggled there a bit. You know, they struggled on offense, especially on third downs. They were 1 for 12 against South Carolina. I think this game is going to be a really close game, a lot closer than Tennessee fans want. I also like this as a money line bet, maybe a little juicer in a parlay, because I think Missouri could pull off the upset here.
Wow, that's a very surprising and interesting take to have from you. The idea that Missouri could win the game outright. That certainly makes that one worth watching. Next game on the slate, and you can make a case along with Georgia Auburn. This is as big as it gets in the SEC here this week. Texas A&M, after a pretty dismal performance, at least from a final score standpoint against Vanderbilt a week ago, gets a chance to go to Tuscaloosa, take on Alabama. The Aggies are 16-point underdogs here in Tuscaloosa, trying to conjure memories of what happened in 2012 when Texas A&M went on the road and pulled the outright upset over the Alabama Crimson Tide. I don't know that people expect that to happen this Saturday, but the curiosity of can the Texas A&M Aggies keep it close to an Alabama team that was very much in control against Missouri in week one, but some last-minute stuff did cause the Tigers to sneak in there with a bit of a backdoor cover. As far as how it's expected to go between the Tide and the Aggies, Mike Griffith, give us your pick.
Whatever happened to Texas A&M's quarterback being a dynamic difference maker this year? He was lucky to get by Vanderbilt. He's not going to get by Alabama, and A&M is not going to cover against the Tide. I got Alabama winning this game 38-21.
So Mike looking for Texas A&M to keep it closer there. He'll take the Aggies there on that. Jeff Sintel, how about you? What do you think about Texas A&M and Alabama?
So the one thing for Texas A&M fans to think about that kind of dismal performance last week is the defense looked pretty good. The line, the front's supposed to be a little bit better. I guess that would be the silver lining in an otherwise dreary victory. I like Alabama. I like Najee Harris. I like Mac Jones. And remember, garbage time for Alabama now means you get to see Bryce Young spinning that ball everywhere and handing the ball off to Trey Sanders. That's not good for those points.
And let me just correct myself on one thing. You heard Jeff take Alabama, and a moment ago you heard Mike Griffith take the Crimson Tide as well. I misspoke on that. Both of our scribes there on the side of Alabama minus the 16 thus far. Connor Riley, how about you? Crimson Tide and Aggies. Give us your thoughts.
16 seems like a lot here. I'm gonna take Texas A&M to keep this a little bit closer than the experts think. I still think Alabama wins this game, but 16 just seems like a lot this early in the season.
So Connor takes Texas A&M. Dog Nation daily audience on the side of Alabama, though, by almost 2-1 margin. 66% take Alabama here. And, Dari, I don't have a great deal of analysis on this game other than to say that I have been a believer that Texas A&M was going to be a better team this upcoming season. And I said a lot of that prior to the Jamon Osborne opt-out, starting linebacker opting out. A&M's had some attrition off the roster that I expected it to have. And admittedly, Kellen Mond did not play a great game last week, really at all. He needs to be better in that regard. I do think Texas A&M with Mike Elko as coordinator can be better defensively, at least enough to present some challenge for Alabama on Saturday. And I guess this is one of those things for me. As much as I've talked up Texas A&M being a little friskier team in the SEC West than they've been, I can't start running from that opinion in week two. Admittedly, it was not a good performance against Vanderbilt a week ago, but not enough yet to scare me off. Keeping it closer than 16, I'll take Texas A&M to do that. However, the flow is on the side of Alabama. I'm pretty sure I know what you're doing here. You want to go with the flow and take the Crimson Tide.
I do. I'm going with flow. I'm going to roll with the Tide again. Their offensive line didn't play that well against Missouri, running the ball. And that doesn't fly with Saban. He don't play that. He wants to dominate both lines of the scrimmage. I expect him to challenge those front five linemen. I expect him to pound the rock against the Aggies. I expect Alabama to shut down Missouri for the most part. Against Missouri, it wasn't until Saban benched his starters late in the third quarter and pretty much the whole fourth quarter that Missouri had some success. This is a game where Bama's going to play the starters 4 quarters and finish strong. I think as this game goes deeper, Alabama is just going to start squeezing and stepping on this game and asserting itself. Texas A&M was real sloppy against Vandy last week with penalties and turnovers, and that doesn't bode well for a game in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, so we'll certainly see how that plays out. As I said before, one of the bigger games in the SEC here this weekend, along with Georgia-Auburn. Fun to watch that one unfold. Speaking of Auburn, the team that Auburn beat a week ago was arguably the SEC's game of the week last week was the Kentucky Wildcats. They get a chance to come back home and take on Ole Miss, fresh off an ugly defensive performance against Florida where they gave up a lot of points, but also found a way to score some points themselves in the debut of Lane Kiffin as Rebels head coach. And as I continue to say, those powder blue Ole Miss uniforms were quite nice. They will not be wearing those on the road this upcoming Saturday, but Kentucky will be in its traditional blue, and they play as a 6.5-point favorite there at Kroger Field at Commonwealth Stadium. So Mike Griffith, Ole Miss, Kentucky, the Wildcats, 6.5-point favorites. The half point could matter here. Give us your thoughts on Kentucky and Ole Miss.
Kroger Field for the Kentucky Wildcats. They get to come home in a battle of the blues. Everybody liked those Ole Miss baby blues, but nobody liked that Ole Miss defense. Kentucky actually outgained Auburn, and if not for a really bad goal line call, the Wildcats might have won that game. I like Kentucky to win this game 27-24. Lane Kiffin covers with some of his magic in the fourth quarter and some points that really don't matter in the outcome.
So Mike Griffith takes Ole Miss here in kind of an interesting spot. It sounds like Dog Nation's Jeff Sintel agrees. Jeff, give us your thoughts.
In a week for me where I'm taking a lot of points with a lot of favorites, I'm going to bet on the underdog Rebels to cover this week. I think they're going to have tons of offense. Remember, he's got some stuff left for John Rice Plumlee after barely getting featured last week against Auburn. And I like Matt Corral. I like Jerry Neely. I like Elijah Moore. I like Ole Miss to keep this game very close.
So both on the side of Ole Miss between Mike and Jeff. Connor Riley, your thoughts on the Rebels and the Wildcats. Tell us what you think.
If this were 7 or 7.5, maybe I'd join Jeff and Griff on the Ole Miss train here. But I'm going to take Kentucky here, 6.5. They actually played, I think, very well against Auburn, except for a few mistakes here and there. I think they're just a better team, and I think they're going to take advantage of what is a pretty weak Ole Miss defense. Give me the Wildcats here.
So you hear Connor take Kentucky. Dog Nation Daily Audience disagrees, though, by a slim margin. 51% on the side of Ole Miss, maybe impressed by the flashiness of Lane Kiffin thus far. Certainly there are some offensive weapons in place for the Rebels. But, Dari, I'll say that this is one of the games this weekend I probably like as well as any of them, not necessarily on the basis of trends, but on the basis of the fact that I view Kentucky as almost the exact opposite of Ole Miss. Ole Miss is a little bit of a flashy team right now. Lane Kiffin's kind of a flashy coach. Yet Kentucky, very solid in its lines of scrimmage, also really hungry for a win here for Mark Stoops in a way that Lane Kiffin just can't quite experience that in just his second game as Ole Miss coach. Last week was a spot that many people thought Kentucky could pull the upset against Auburn and really make some sort of announcement about their intentions for the upcoming season. Ultimately, they were not able to do that, although statistically they did perform pretty well against the Tigers a week ago. This is kind of a back against the wall spot for Kentucky. I don't believe they want to be 0-2. I think the 6.5 point number matters here. That half point, meaning you all have to do is win by a pretty common score of 7 to get the cover. This is about as confident as I'm going to be in anything. I think this is a really good spot for Kentucky on Saturday. And even with that said, though, the flow is on the side of Ole Miss. So do you want to go with the flow and take Lane Kiffin and the Rebels?
I'm going with the flow. I'm taking Ole Miss and the points. Their offense was clicking against Florida. I think their passing game is going to give Kentucky some problems. Kentucky's going to have no problem running the ball against the Rebels. They're going to be able, and they're going to try to control the clock and the tempo of this game. I think this game is really close. I don't see Kentucky being able to win by a lot of points in this game because of Ole Miss's offense. I like Ole Miss to be able to catch up in case they do fall behind by some, maybe defensive scores or turnovers that they may give up. But I like Ole Miss enough to win this game outright. I think this is a great money play, a money line play to take Ole Miss, as well as to juice in some parlays. Their offense is going to give Kentucky some problems here.
Fair to point out that one of the things that Kentucky probably expected to have going for it in this game was the return of Joey Gatewood as quarterback, although that transfer situation, like a lot around the SEC right now, is still unsettled for the moment. Dari, I have to admit, your pick surprised me a little bit. I thought that you would maybe lean in the home team with that one. I did not expect you to like Ole Miss as much as you did. So we are solidly on opposite sides of this one, which makes it fun.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, this one is just the passing game for Ole Miss looks. I mean, it's working. Lane Kiffin had that working. That's one of the positives to take away from that Florida game. And the matchups that they're going to be able to create is going to be a problem for Kentucky. And I think that's the key to this game.
Well, speaking of passing by Ole Miss, another team in the Magnolia State that loves to throw it is Mississippi State, and that was arguably the story of week one in the SEC. The huge numbers put up by the Bulldogs offense, led by Mike Leach in his coaching debut for Mississippi State, getting the upset outright win over LSU in really pretty impressive fashion, certainly emphatic fashion on the offensive side of the ball. And now they get a chance in Starkville this week to play as a big favorite against the Arkansas Razorbacks. They are 18-point favorites there. So, Mike Griffith, your thoughts on Mississippi State and the team that Georgia saw a week ago, Arkansas. Take it away.
You know, Mike Leach looked awful good in his debut playing against the LSU team that was missing 16 starters. But now we're talking about Mississippi State playing against an Arkansas team that's been tested, right? So I'm not as convinced that there's going to be this runaway win that I think a lot of other people see coming. I'm going to take the Hogs to cover in this game. I got Mississippi State 34, Arkansas 24.
So here, Mike Griffith, fresh off seeing Georgia against the Razorbacks a week ago. He does take Arkansas to keep it close right there. How about Dog Nation's Jeff Sentell? Give us your thoughts on the game.
That's a big number. But, I think this is one of the more intriguing games of the SEC slate this week. Folks, we'll remember that Arkansas should get some DB personnel back in this game. That's going to help against the bandwagon. I love that tweet this week from Mississippi State. I do like Arkansas to stay within that 18. I think it's about a 14-point win there for Mississippi State, no matter if they sling it around 70 times. I like those points. Give me Sam Pittman in Arkansas.
So Jeff Sentell also on the side of the Arkansas Razorbacks, so maybe impressed by a first-half performance a week ago where the Razorbacks kept it close with Georgia so far. Mike and Jeff both leaning on that for their selection. How about Connor Riley? Your thought on Mississippi State and Arkansas? Take it away.
If these guys are willing to bet against KJ Costello, who was awesome last week after a certain someone on this panel touted how good KJ Costello was all offseason, I'm just going to do it again. I'm going to take Mississippi State here. Arkansas, yes, they did some stuff in the first half there, but if Georgia had competent quarterback play and KJ Costello is more than competent, Georgia probably wins that game by 5-6 touchdowns instead. So give me the Bulldogs here.
So Connor on the side of KJ Costello and Mississippi State there, putting up big numbers again. As far as the Dog Nation daily audience goes on all of this, they weigh in with their thoughts. 66% taking Mississippi State, impressed by the favorite and the big numbers a week ago. They're on the side of the other Bulldogs out of Starkville here. So, Dari, I will say that this game to me, to a degree, is a little bit difficult to pick in that, last week we saw a version of Arkansas that's going to be better defensively, I believe, this year with Barry Odom as coordinator than it has been certainly during the Chad Morris era. But we also saw a team that once Georgia started clicking near the end of the first half and certainly in the third quarter, Arkansas could offer no resistance whatsoever. I think there's a little bit of an emotion for a team in its first game, and sometimes that flattens out a little bit in its second game, especially when you have to go on the road here, which Arkansas will do on Saturday. I am not going to buy into Mississippi State too much on the basis of just one performance against LSU. That game a week ago may say more about LSU than it does about Mississippi State. I know you're a much bigger believer in Mike Leach than probably I am. I'll join you on the Leach bandwagon for this particular week, though. They put out the bandwagon video a little earlier. I will take the Bulldogs minus the 18 here. I don't feel great about this, but I imagine that the best we see of Arkansas may have been the first half last week and the debut of a new coaching staff. This may be more of the real Arkansas here this week, and it may be a version of Arkansas that makes it quite easy on the Bulldogs there at home. I'll take Mississippi State. That puts the flow on the side of Mississippi State. You want to join the flow, go with the flow and take the Bulldogs.
Yes, I'm going to go with the flow. I'm taking Mike Leach to cover the 18 points. I also like the over in this game, because I think Felipe will get some touchdowns going against this semi-stout Mississippi State defense. But Arkansas is not going to be able to slow down Costello and the air raid. Osiris Mitchell will have another big day running up and down the field. I like Mike Leach and his offense. It's going to continue to roll.
I think the over here is kind of an interesting thought on the basis that I do think that Kendall Briles, the Arkansas offensive coordinator, had a good game plan against Georgia. There's only so much you can do to execute against that Georgia defense, but on the touchdown that Arkansas was able to score a week ago, it was a brilliantly designed play to get the wide receiver on the Georgia safety account in that case. So while Briles gets less attention than Mike Leach, I would say he's a pretty good play caller in his own right, Ari.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, they'll put a lot more points up this weekend.
All right, we're going to finish with the Georgia-Auburn here in just a moment. We'll look at the total points expected in that game in the Deep South's oldest rivalry. Let me remind you, it's Go With The Flow presented by R.S. Andrews. We certainly appreciate them making it all possible. We appreciate the great work they're doing for our audience and all kinds of air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. It was a little cool in my house last night. You start getting those 40s at night, makes you think about it. It's about time to get that factory fresh spec tune-up for your furnace, getting it back to the specs and making sure that it's ready to go for the cold weather season to come. If you've got any hesitation that your furnace is ready to go for the winter that's about to be on its way, it's time to get that peace of mind right now. Check out our friends at R.S. Andrews. They're online at rsandrews.com. Speaking of peace of mind, there's probably very little of that for LSU fans after they were torched by Mississippi State a week ago, and now LSU goes on the road to Nashville to take on the Vanderbilt Commodores, and LSU plays this game as a 20-point favorite after Vandy kept it closer than the experts would have thought against Texas A&M last week. Mike Griffith, our final SEC game to a pick here. Give us your thoughts on Vanderbilt and LSU.
I'm going to take Vanderbilt to cover begrudgingly just because I think LSU is got to find itself, and I think that they're going to go a little conservative here. And, I think that, the Joe Burrow days are over. The purple and gold confetti has finally stopped falling from the ceiling, and the LSU fans have thankfully disappeared from social media. So I'm going to go LSU 27-14. I'm going to give Vandy the cover. They showed some fight in that first game. I'm going to give them another game before guys start opting out and pursuing that valuable Vanderbilt academic education.
So Mike takes Vanderbilt to cover the spread for second consecutive week after they did it against Texas A&M on the road, doing it this time plus the 20 at home, he says, against LSU. Jeff Sintel, give us your thoughts.
If anybody sits there in their mind's eye and says, I know exactly what LSU is about this year, and likewise for Vanderbilt, I think Vanderbilt can summon up some of that defense that held Kellen Mond and the great offensive mind Jimbo Fisher in check. That's a lot of points, especially for a team that's quarterbacked by Miles Brennan to overcome, also without some of those major weapons as well. I like Vanderbilt in this game with all those points. This kind of feels to me something like 21-10 LSU, and that's more than enough to deal with that points.
So Jeff also on the side of Vandy here, and it sounds like Dog Nation's Connor Riley agrees. Connor, tell us more.
I picked the Commodores last week. 32 was too big. I think 20 is still a little bit too big this week. Give me the Commodores here plus the 20 at home.
So clean sweep by our scribes, all three taking Vanderbilt. Dog Nation Daily Audience doesn't see it that way. 71% on the 20-point favorite on the road, LSU. And Dari, this is one of those things I think we're going to see a lot of in the SEC this year. I mentioned this earlier when it comes to Kentucky. After losing a game last week, a lot of Wildcats fans would have liked to have seen their team find a way to win. They now come home in desperate need of a better performance. I think LSU, after losing to Mississippi State, this is, after all, the defending national champion. There's a sense of trying to conjure up some pride that I'm sure comes into play against Vanderbilt on Saturday. I don't know what to make of the fact that Vandy kept it close with Texas A&M, and it's fair to point out that the Commodores did move the football a little bit versus LSU a year ago. So maybe these are all warning signs that LSU is just not set up here. Miles Brennan so far has played at quarterback about the way I would have expected him to. But nonetheless, I'm just going to have enough trust in LSU to say they are not going to start the season with two ugly weeks in a row. I think both the sense of pride and also just the feeling of pressure, knowing they need to bounce back. Maybe they take out a little anger against Vanderbilt. It's a lot of points to lay on the road, but I'll do that with LSU nonetheless. Oh, and I guess I should now set you up after all of that. Even though I take LSU and the audience takes LSU, the flow is on the side of Vanderbilt. So do you want to go with the flow and take Vanderbilt? After all these years of doing the show, you'd think I'd have the script down by now. But let me give you your setup. Do you want to go with the flow and take Vanderbilt?
No, I do not. No whammy, no whammy, no whammy. Stop.
Right.
This game is a double whammy. You have Vanderbilt keeping that game close against Texas A&M. And you have LSU losing at home after coming off a national title and getting kind of punched in the mouth by the air raid offense. No one's sneaking up on any. That's the double whammy colliding here. Vandy is that they're on the radar, and you have LSU that's extremely pissed off. I like LSU bouncing back and taking out all that frustration out on Vandy this week. Give Derek Mason a lot of credit for keeping that game close against the Aggies. They had a lot of fight, but LSU isn't going to be sloppy like Texas A&M was, They're not going to have a lot of turnovers. They're not going to have a lot of penalties. This is the perfect opponent for LSU to get back on track and get some confidence, and they're going to easily cover this 20 points.
I think Dari's analysis is spot on here. We're in the NBA playoffs. A lot of NBA bettors kind of operating on what they call a zigzag theory, looking to go against whatever happened in the previous game. And I think this sets up for a classic zigzag on both sides. LSU likely destined to play better. Vanderbilt unlikely to maintain what it did a week ago. And I think LSU, as my pick would suggest, is truly the right side here. Here on Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews, let's turn our attention back to Georgia Auburn to close things out. And, well, let me go through the picks. And then, Dari, I've got something I want to ask you about this. So Georgia, Auburn, the over-under. We always close with our expected point total. The number is set right now at 45. It has been a very easy cash on the under as late for UGA. Is it that easy again this time? Mike Griffith, tell us what you think.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the under. I don't see Kirby running the score up in this game. I know he tried a couple years ago with that fake punt in the final minutes. But, this time I think you'll see just enough JT Daniels. You'll probably see a little maybe even some Dwan Mathis snaps in the fourth quarter. So I'm going to go with the under because I think this Georgia defense is going to put the clamps on Auburn.
So Mike Griffith, decisive with his take of the under. Jeff Sintel, do you agree? Tell us your thoughts.
I'm going to be honest with you, man. This number could be 35, and I still might go under on this one. I think 21-7, 24-10, that's what it feels like for me. I'm going to take the under and feel comfortable about doing so.
So far, the under has been an easy pick. Connor Riley, I'm guessing that's the direction you're going as well. Why don't you tell us?
Georgia's last 11 games against SEC opponents, they are 10-1 going under. I expect them to go under again this week. Again, Jeff sort of said it really well. This could be 35, and I'd still think about taking the under here.
Dog Nation Daily audience going to join in on the parade here. 94% of our listeners and viewers also taking the under of 45, which is an incredibly low number. And yet, Dari, I think if the number were lower than this, I would still take the under. I just think this is an easy pick. I don't see a bunch of points on either side of this game. I think that Georgia winning requires holding Auburn to a low point total because I think the Georgia offense isn't quite as built out right now as Auburn's is. And it sounds like on the basis of your pick a little earlier, you maybe kind of agree with that. But it's still a game I think that Georgia can win because I do think that Georgia has the better defense here. The under is a clean sweep thus far. So, Dari, you want to go with the flow and take the under of 45 between Georgia and Auburn.
Yes, I'm going to go with the flow. We'll take the under. We'll make it a family pot. I think this is going to be a defensive battle. Points are going to be hard to come by. Very low scoring. Both teams are going to try to control the clock and play a lot of field position. The last 10 matchups between these two teams, they've averaged 42.9 total points per game. A lot of these scores have been low. I think if you even set the over-under at 39, I would go under. I think it's going to be in the 30s total points scored. Unless there's some rabbit in the hat that Monken has with, Daniels or something that we haven't seen, I expect to be a very low-scoring game.
So my question for you is this. We've seen this in college football before where, go back to the Art Briles era at Baylor, where they couldn't set the number high enough week to week. No matter how high it was set, Baylor found a way to go over that. Certainly even first half totals, you had some issues like that. Is this the sure thing in college football right now where seemingly no matter how low you set a total, and 45 for an SEC game is really pretty low, no matter how low you set a total, Georgia still finds a way to go under it. And they're winning a lot of these games because they control the situation defensively so much. Yet it just seems like Vegas and the offshore books, they just can't set a total low enough for Georgia not to go underneath it.
Yeah, I mean, right now it's what are they, 8 out of 9 or something like that on their last games.
It's an overwhelming number, yeah.
Yeah, it's the best thing you can do right now is better than the stock market or anything else is play the under for these Georgia games, and you just ride it. I think this year is a perfect year to continue to ride it just because the defense is so good, and especially with the struggles on offense, it's going to be a work in progress. So. I love unders. I'm long on the unders this year for Georgia.
So as we get ready to close things out, I need to compliment you once again. You look great there in your UGA-inspired man cave there. You get the UGA gear on. One of the things you did not do here in week 2 that you did do in week 1 is you didn't crack a beverage during the show today. What's that about?
Well, that was a kind of kickoff the season.
Okay.
With that beverage, a lot of excitement. Kind of a lot of pause this week from that first half from the Georgia-Arkansas game. However, I will promise you this: a Georgia victory this weekend, and I'll be having a nice cold beverage next week for the game picks. May even have something on the rocks.
I like the idea of that. That sounds great for sure. And for all of you getting ready to watch games this week, and if you got some bets down on the games, best of luck to you on all of those. Whatever beverage you have on the rocks, I certainly hope you enjoy that as well. Dari, thanks for your time. On behalf of Mike Griffith and Jeff Sintel, Connor Riley, the entire Dog Nation team, we appreciate their time as well. Our on-site producer, Michael Carvel, keeping things running the way that it's supposed to. Appreciate him also. It's Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. If you want the air conditioning vents flowing the way they're supposed to, the hot water flowing out of your water heater the way it's supposed to, R.S. Andrews the one to turn to for all of that too. Story after story, they've been delivering smiles, and so many people in our Dog Nation audience can attest to this. They can deliver a smile for you as well, but you've got to find them online at rsandrews.com for all of your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Enjoy the games. We'll see you back here again next week for Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews.